All right, we are on chapter 7 of Forest Folklore. I kind of can't zoom in on my book right now because I set the camera up before I started reading. But we are on chapter 7 of Forest Folklore. And if you were wondering, this view from this video and the last video is the forest behind my house. And we are at the part called, let me just check, make sure my camera's good. Okay, seems all good. Okay, we are at the part called Fossil or Petrified Forests and Trees. Page 245. During the ages which have elapsed since vegetation first appeared upon the face of the earth, the remains of many trees and other plants have been found in a silicified state, testifying to the fact of their former existence, and speaking eloquently of the aeons which have elapsed since they waved green over the land. The vast vegetation of the Carboniferous epoch has already been mentioned, but many isolated instances occur where the remains of forests of a later age are still plainly visible. Baldwin Mulhausen speaks of having seen a remarkable formation of silicified stems of trees in situ or partly prostrate. At another spot, the travelers saw what resembled masses of wood which had been felled previous to the cultivation of the land. Trees of all sizes appeared scattered around, some more than 60 feet long, but a closer examination revealed that these were fossilized trees which had been gradually washed down by torrents. In long past ages, these trees had flourished on the highlands, had fallen, had been covered over and silicified, and in after ages, possibly owing to convulsions of nature, had been raised once more as fossils which torrents had swept downwards, breaking many in the process, until they appeared as if sawn into logs 2 or more feet in diameter. Many were hollow and of a dark hue, but the rings and even the bark were quite discernible. A beautiful blend of agate and jasper coloring appeared in some of the blocks, while broken fragments presented truly lovely tints of various colors, but other pieces resembled simply rotten wood. In one of the expeditions to Banks Land in the Arctic regions, several hills were found which were formed of accumulations of wood, the remains of vast forests which had been flourishing there thousands of years previously. The records of the expedition tell that the ends of trunks and branches of trees were seen protruding through the rich, loamy soil in which they were embedded, while some of the trees were of a complete ligneous formation. They comprised the trunks and branches, some soft and dark and in a state of semi-carbonization, while others seemed to be fresh but hard, in which the structure of the wood was quite apparent. In other places, the ligneous formation was hard and flattened, owing to the pressure which it had undergone for ages, and in this case traces of coal were observed. The trunk of one tree was 26 inches in diameter, and that of another was 3 feet in circumference. Both appeared to have belonged to the Coniferae. Charles Darwin says that in the Uspallata range of the Andes, he noticed some snow-white, projecting columns on a bare slope, and closer observation revealed that they were petrified trees. 11 of them were silicified, and from 30 to 40 were converted into a coarsely crystallized white calcareous spar. These trees were of the fir tribe, with affinities to both the Araucaria and the yew. Professor Agassiz, when traveling in Brazil, found on the seashore the remains of forests now covered with sand. One of these submerged forests was at the mouth of the Agarape Grande, where evidently it had grown in one of those marshy lands constantly inundated and in it the stumps of the trees still standing erect in the peat had been laid bare on both sides of the river by the encroachments of the ocean. At Vigia, just where the Para River meets the sea, there was another submerged forest with the stumps of innumerable trees standing in it and encroached upon in the same way by tidal sand. No doubt, Agassiz remarked, these forests were once all continuous and stretched across the whole basin of what is now called the Para River. During Dr. Livingstone's first expedition to Africa in 1840 to 56, he mentions that after leaving Chai Pang, he skirted a range of hills at the base of which he observed a forest of large petrified trees of the Araucarian type. He also observes that numerous fossil trees abound in the district of Chakova, many lying prostrate and others standing upright, while others were shattered into fragments. The explorer gives other instances of having observed petrified forests and trees. At low tide, submerged forests may be seen at various places around the coasts of the British Islands, the stumps and roots becoming visible. They may be seen in Mounts Bay, Cornwall, and Bristol Channel, at the mouth of the Humber in the Firth of Forth, and as far north as the Orkney Islands. The most of these appear to be remains of ancient forests of Sigillarius. The forests of which all these are the vestiges seem to have flourished during interglacial periods and to have perished when the ice cap again covered the land. Man appears to have wandered in their shade, as weapons of stone and of bronze have been found in them, along with bones of the elk, the beaver, and other animals not now known in these islands. And now we are at the part called bark of trees. The bark of various trees has been widely taken advantage of for many purposes, for clothing, food, writing, etc., and has even been used in lieu of coin. In very ancient times in the northern parts of Europe, mankind had apparently no other garments than the bark of trees, and it was not until later on that he began to clothe himself in the skins of animals. Even yet, in many parts of the world, notably in the islands of the South Seas and in the Malay archipelago, the bark of trees is formed into a kind of cloth. The process of manufacture is very much the same everywhere. Large cylinders of bark are cut from the tree and beaten with mallets till it separates from the wood. It is then repeatedly soaked and beaten till it becomes extremely thin and very tough. Sometimes the sap from the bark of certain trees is used to stain this cloth, and it also renders it waterproof. This cloth is known as ahu in Tahiti, and in the Tonga Islands it was called natu. In India, anchorites, as a penance, sometimes covered themselves with the bark of trees when they returned from their ablutions, in order to keep the moisture in their bodies. A remnant of the Aborigines of Ceylon still inhabit the forests of that island. These are the Vedas, or hunters. They live in caves or in huts made from bark, and formerly their clothing consisted of bark. Ages ago, they seem to have inhabited hollow trees, as in Sinhalese, the word for a hollow tree is rukula, and the same word now means a house. Bark has even been used as food in emergencies. Thus we are told that during the retreat of Xerxes, his army being in sore straits for provisions, they stripped off the bark of trees and ate it along with the leaves. A pestilence, however, followed this strange diet and destroyed large numbers of them. Boats were frequently made of bark among the Tanat tribes of North America. The canoes were formed from strips of bark sewn together with fiber, and the seams were filled with pitch made from fir trees. In Russia, boats are still made from the bark of the birch. The Aborigines of Australia, according to Captain Cook, used sheets of bark crimped up at the ends as canoes. In very early times, the inner bark of trees was used for writing upon. This is the layer called in Latin liber. Hence, a book consisting as it did of leaves made from that inner bark was termed liber, from which the word library is derived. Dictys Cretensis was an author supposed to be contemporary with the siege of Troy, of which he wrote an account in Punic letters on linden bark paper. This manuscript was said to have been found in a tin case by some shepherds in Dictys's tomb at Knossos, and was afterwards translated into Greek, but the story seems to be somewhat apocryphal. Some nations, such as the Chinese, still in many instances use this inner bark of trees for pencraft. Sir Thomas Holditch, speaking of Captain H. Bauer's journey across Tibet in 1893, says, "It was Bauer who first astonished the world of Oriental scholars with the birch bark manuscript, dug out of the Turkestan desert near Kashgar, which proved to be one of the most ancient manuscripts in the world and has set scientists exploring and working in the same direction ever since." The bark of the birch tree is the most durable of all, and was largely used by the ancients for writing purposes before the invention of paper. A striking instance of the durability of this thin pellicle was found in the mines of Dvoretskoy in Siberia, where a piece of birch wood was disinterred, completely fossilized. The thin outer skin of the bark was exactly in its natural state, and had a white satiny shimmer precisely as may be seen on birch trees growing at the present day. As bark was used for writing upon in ancient times, so in more modern times bark was the means of the discovery of printing. We are told that Gutenberg one day amused himself by carving out letters from the bark of a beech tree, wrapping them up when still damp in paper. He was astonished to find the impression of them on the paper when he reached home. This gave him the idea. Carving out others, he was delighted to find that they gave clear impressions, and so the art of printing was evolved. The bark of several trees abounds in medicinal properties. Such, for instance, is the cinchona or Peruvian bark, known as quinine, from the Peruvian name for the bark, quina quina, meaning bark of barks. Another equally efficacious remedy for fevers is obtained from the bark of willow trees, which is known as salicine. As the willow abounds in marshy and wet districts where fever and ague are very prevalent, it would appear that nature had provided the remedy in close proximity to the disease, and it has been found that an infusion of willow bark has almost the same curative effect as the salicine of the druggist. Marco Polo tells how the great Kublai Khan caused the bark of trees to be made into something like paper and to be used as money all over his dominions. The bark used was that of the mulberry tree and was the layer next to the wood. The smooth, shining bark of some trees offers an irresistible invitation to carve letters and figures on it, which for long has been a sentimental pastime of lovers, who usually carve their own and their sweethearts' names or initials, along with the date, so that in after years they may be reminded of a long and joyous summer day spent in the woodlands in loving company. The bark of the beech tree is the favorite, and in Shakespeare's day, and probably long before, the practice was as prevalent as it is now. In As You Like It, Act 3, Scene 2, Orlando enters the forest of Arden and exclaims, "O Rosalind, these trees shall be my books, and in their barks my thoughts all character, that every eye which in this forest looks shall see thy virtue witnessed everywhere. Run, run, Orlando, carve on every tree the fair, the chaste, the unexpressive she." Evelyn quotes several poetic effusions on the same subject thus: "My name on bark engraven by your fair hand, O anon there, cut by your knife does stand, and with the stock my name alike does grow, be it so, and my advancing honour show. There on the tender bark to carve my love, and as they grow, so may my hopes improve. Repeat thy words on cherry bark I'll take, and that red skin my table book will make." This next section is called Leaves of Trees. Homer compares the race of mankind to leaves upon a tree thus: like leaves on trees, the race of man is found, now green in youth, now withering on the ground. Another race the following spring supplies. They fall successive, and successive rise. So generations in their course decay, so flourish these when those are passed away. The leaves of trees were and are often utilized in various ways for many different purposes. The most ancient method of writing was upon leaves, of which the papyrus rolls of ancient Egypt are outstanding examples. The disciples of Mahomet recorded his sayings on palm leaves and on the shoulder bones of sheep. These were all placed in a chest and left in charge of one of his wives. 5 years after his death, they were arranged and published. In ancient times, there were supposed to live certain women, 10 in number, in different parts of the world, who were believed to be inspired to utter prophecies. These women were known as Sibyls, and the most celebrated of them was the Sibyl of Cumae in Italy, who inscribed her warnings on leaves. Virgil speaks of her thus: When wafted thither you reach the city Cumae, the hallowed lakes, the Avernus resounding through the woods, you will see the raving prophetess, who, beneath a deep rock, reveals the fates and commits to the leaves of trees her characters and words. Whatever verses the Virgin has inscribed on the leaves, she ranges in harmonious order, and leaves in the cave enclosed by themselves. Uncovered, they remain in their position, nor recede from their order. But when, upon turning the hinge, a small breath of wind has blown upon them, and the door, by opening, has discomposed of the tender leaves, she never afterward cares to catch the verses as they are fluttering in the hollow cave, nor to recover their situation or join them together. Men depart without a response and detest the Sibyl's grot. It was said that a stream of prophecy flowed from the Castalian fountain of Daphne, and it is recorded that the Emperor Hadrian read the history of his future greatness on a leaf dipped in the Castalian stream. Fruits as well as leaves are connected with inscriptions. Thus, in one of the rooms of the Memnonium, a painting shows the pharaoh Ramses II seated under a Persia tree, on the fruits of which the goddess of wisdom, Ra-Tum, and the sacred scribe Thoth are writing his name. Another painting at Medinet Habao shows Thothmes III being led by Hathor and Thoth before the tree of life, and on its fruits the god Amun-Ra is inscribing a sacred formula. Leaves of trees were believed to know all secrets and to give them up to those who knew how to consult them, and hence the ancient magicians used to encircle their heads with leaves so as to obtain wisdom. Leaves speak and sing. The harmony of the spheres is the singing of the leaves of the celestial tree. A Swedish ballad tells how, when a young nymph played, the leaves of the trees accompanied her harmoniously. In ancient writers says that Japhet invented the first musical instrument after hearing the rustling of leaves in the wind. Leaves have been thought to possess souls or to be inhabited by some kind of beings, and certain sects of the Gujarat stretched the Pythagorean doubt so far that they would not eat green leaves lest they should swallow some of the living beings inhabiting them. Thales the Greek imagined the earth to be a cup floating on a leaf of the plane tree. The Scandinavian legend of Brandon relates how he met a tiny man floating on a leaf on the sea. In one hand he held a little bowl, and in the other held a pointer. Dipping the pointer into the sea, he then let the water drip off it into the bowl, and so on until the bowl was full. He then emptied out the bowl and began filling it again, and so on continually, as he was doomed to measure the sea until the judgment day. A female saint called Saint Noyala, accompanied by her nurse, is alleged to have crossed the sea to Brittany on the leaf of a tree. In India, there are several legends of a similar kind, one representing Brahma seated on a lotus floating on the sea in deep contemplation, and another showing Vishnu as an infant floating on the sea of milk in a papala leaf and sucking his toe. One of the trees of India is called the arka tree, which means having a thunderbolt for leaf. On account of the cuneiform shape of the leaves, the word arka is also a name for the sun, and during the Vedic period, the leaf of this tree was used in sacrifices to that luminary. There is an Indian tradition that those who approach this tree will become blind, which probably had its origin in the name, as lightning and the sun both dazzle the eye. Some of the ancient writers tell of wonderful trees whose leaves produced animals and even serpents, and in one case the leaves as they fell off became changed into butterflies. The Italian traveler Pigafetta, during his voyage round the world with the squadron of Magellan in the beginning of the 16th century, was the first to find the famous animated leaf in the forests of Borneo, and his account of it was such that his narrative was looked upon as fabulous, though afterwards proved to be true. He said, "What to me seemed most extraordinary was to see trees, the leaves of which as they fell became animated. These leaves resemble those of the mulberry tree, except in not being so long. Their stalk is short and pointed, and near the stalk on one side and the other they have 2 feet. Upon being touched, they make away, but when crushed, they yield no blood. I kept one in a box for 9 days. On opening the box at the end of this time, the leaf was alive and walking around it. I am of opinion they live on air. These leaf insects, which have also been called walking leaves, belong to the order Orthoptera, and all the members of the family Phasmidae bear a resemblance to natural objects. The genus Phyllium bears the strongest likeness to a leaf, but it is only the female which does so. The wings, in their shape, color, and venation, strongly resemble the leaves among which it lives and on which it feeds, and as if to increase that resemblance, the leaves have leaf-like expansions. In the Malay Peninsula, leaves are used as a term when hunting the gaur or Indian bison. To prevent the animal when pursued from turning to charge its pursuers, the hunter takes a couple of leaves from the nearest tree, folds each in 2, and then slips one inside the other so that the upper half of the one encloses the lower half of the other. He then pegs down these leaves into a footprint of the animal, uttering a charm over them, which is believed to prevent the animal from turning. The idea is that as an insect which had crawled along the folded leaf from its stem to its tip would find itself no farther advanced on its journey than at the beginning, so the pursued animal would be unable to proceed further, but would be forced to return in its tracks, and the charm would prevent it from charging its pursuers. In the Nicobar Islands, a man believed to be possessed by devils is released from their presence by being first smeared over with pig's blood and then beaten with leaves. The devils are understood to go into the leaves, which must be at once thrown into the sea before the dawn appears. When the natives of the island of Timor are making long journeys and are heated and fatigued, they use leafy branches to fan themselves with, and when they are finished with them, they throw them down on some particular spot. All generations of travelers have done the same and thrown the branches on the same spot, with the result that numerous heaps of withered branches are seen all over the island. The idea at the bottom of this process is that the fatigue which is felt is supposed to pass into the leaves and to be left behind. The Fijians had a custom of throwing a leaf on the spot where a man had been clubbed to death, as a sign of respect for him and also to avoid a like fate. William Mariner says that in the Tonga Islands, green leaves were worn by the priests around the neck as marks of submission and humility, as well as of fear, not towards the enemy, but towards the gods. As a certain ford on the Calabar River in West Africa, much frequented by crocodiles, there is a large oval stone which is said to be an altar of a goddess named Mim. She is very powerful and often takes the shape of a crocodile or of a snake. When a native wishes to assure himself of a safe passage through the river, he plucks a leaf, rubs his forehead with it, and says, "May I be free from danger. May I go through the water to the other side. May I see no evil." He then throws down the leaf on a heap of similar leaves in front of the oval stone and says, "I am coming across the river. May the crocodile lay down his head." Being thus satisfied that the goddess will appreciate this offering and allow him to cross unmolested, he plunges boldly into the river. The natives of this same district treat the dead body of a chameleon with the utmost respect. If a native kills one, he leaves it by the wayside, and every passerby plucks a few leaves and drops them on the body, saying, "Look, here is your mat." Mr. Talbot says that this observance is intended to pacify the shade of the chameleon, which would otherwise go to the earth god Obasi Nesai and clamor for vengeance on his slayers. In other parts of Africa, as well as in many other parts of the world, similar practices are prevalent, and travelers in remote regions often come across heaps of leaves or branches which have accumulated by every passing native adding his quota. And this next part is thorns, spines, prickles, etc. Thorns, spines, prickles, ad hoc genius omne, are the natural defenses of plants against mankind who wishes to pluck their flowers or fruit, or against animals which desire to browse on their foliage. An interesting example of protective measures against browsing animals is afforded by the holly. When this tree is young, the leaves are well protected by spines, but as it increases in height and the leaves are at last beyond the reach of animals, they lose their spines, and their edges are smooth all round. The poet Southey refers to this peculiarity in his poem called "The Holly Tree." He writes, "Below a curling fence its leaves are seen, wrinkled and keen. No grazing cattle through their prickly round can reach to wound. But as they grow where nothing is to fear, smooth and unarmed, the pointless leaves appear." Thorns, etc., are credited with having a certain magic power owing to their capacity to lay hold of a thing. On Walpurgis night, that night on which all the witches met to hold their unholy revels, it was customary in Bohemia to place branches of hawthorn, gooseberry, wild rose, and other prickly plants on the thresholds of the cowhouses, in order to catch the witches and prevent them from entering. The Persian epic tells that, although Esfendiyar cannot be wounded by any weapon, yet he is at last slain by a thorn thrown by Rustum, which penetrated his eye. Many have been the conjectures as to which plant furnished the crown of thorns. Thus the hawthorn, the holly, the barberry, and the Libyan thorn, among others, have been named as being probably the plant. Sir John Mandeville says that it was formed of jonks of the sea, that is to say, rushes of the sea that pricken as sharply as thorns. But he further tells how Jesus was led into a garden where the Jews made him a crown of the branches of albaspine, that is, white thorn, hawthorn, that grew in that same garden, and setting it on his head so fast and so sore that the blood ran down by many places of his visage, and of his neck, and of his shoulders, and therefore hath white thorn many virtues. But he that beareth a branch on him, thereof no thunder, nay, no manner of tempest may dare him. Nay, in the house that it is, in may no evil ghost enter, nay, come in unto the place that it is in. Mandeville says that the crown was afterwards divided into two, one part being kept in Paris and the other in Constantinople, and he adds, "And I have one of the precious thorns that someth lick a white thorn, and that was given to me for great specialty." The whole crown had been originally preserved in Constantinople, but it is said that Louis IX of France, having aided Baldwin II, the last Frankish emperor of Romania, he received from him part of it, which he bore triumphantly to Paris. In Normandy, the peasants wear a sprig of the hawthorn in their caps for the reason that the Saviour's crown was formed from it. And in Brittany, there is a legend to the effect that when Christ was bearing his cross, a small bird endeavored to relieve his sufferings by plucking one of the thorns from his brow. The bird's breast became stained with blood, and it became known ever afterwards as Robin Redbreast. In the West Indies, the legend is that the crown was made from the cashew tree, and that one of its yellow petals became black in consequence of the blood staining it. A French legend tells that Jesus, being once pursued by the Jews, rested in a wood when the magpies mischievously covered him with thorns, but the swallows came and removed them. This next part is called Origin of Fire. There was an ancient tradition that fire first appeared on the tops of trees, which may have been an allusion to St. Elmo's fire. The ancient Persians saw the fire generator in the cypress or konar tree because its needles point to the sky and from it flashed the first spark. They say it was the first tree planted in their paradise, whence it was brought to earth by Zarathustra, who saw in it the image of Ahura Mazda himself. On account of this, it was planted before all the fire temples and elsewhere, in an endeavor to recall, however feebly, the memory of the lost paradise. Ancient myths tell that the hawthorn originated from lightning, and Jacob Grimm says that the ancient Germans made their funeral pyres from its wood. Dr. Gill, referring to this, remarks, "It is thought that by virtue of the sacred fire which flows from the thorns, the souls of the dead are received into the sky. And it is clear that the sacred fire is the image of the celestial fire, and the burning of the corpse a symbol of the storm, since the funeral pyre and the hammer were both consecrated to the god Thor. In various countries, the usual way of producing fire is by rubbing two pieces of wood together, which is in many cases successful, even if the wood be green. It has been conjectured that many forest fires, apparently causeless, have had their origin by the branches of trees rubbing together, and probably primitive men, being forest dwellers, obtained their first ideas of fire from that phenomenon. It may be that a divinity was believed to reside within the branches. Sir John Lubbock mentions that in De Brosse's Cult de Dieu Fetishes, reference is made to a passage in Sancho Niata, quoted by Eusebius, in which the first 13 generations of men are described. The third generation had the names of foes, pur, and flux, meaning light, fire, and flame, and these discovered how to generate fire by the rubbing of two sticks of wood together against each other, and they taught men the use thereof. Evelyn, speaking of the probable origin of sociability among mankind, tells how Vitruvius described the process, Vitruve 1-2 CI, when he says that the violent impact of one tree against another, owing to a furious wind, setting them into flames. These flames did not so much surprise the savages as the heat which was produced. Finding this warmth so comfortable, they would be induced to approach nearer. As the fire waned, they would encourage one another by signs and barbarous tones to heap on fresh combustibles, and these tones would in time be formed into words. Thus, from this accident, the savages would find the benefits of society and would mutually agree to live in company with each other instead of in solitude as before. When it is recognized, as said on page 161, that the ivy personifying Dionysus is a subordinate thunder god containing the sacred fire, it can be easily understood how ivy wood was one of the earliest woods used as a fire stick. Oak wood was also used by primitive man, probably in conjunction with ivy, one piece, the borer, being male and the other female. But primitive man would not trouble about sexuality. He wanted fire and probably experimented until he found wood suitable for his purpose. Dr. Fraser points out that among the northern nations, Perpetual fires kindled with the wood of certain oak trees were kept up in honor of Perkunas. If such a fire went out, it was lighted again by friction of the sacred wood. The Beltane fire of olden times, which marked the commencement of summer, was kindled by this method, and the fire produced was known as need fire. Should the sacred fire in the forum of ancient Rome be allowed to expire through the negligence of the Vestal Virgins, it would only be reignited by the Pontifex Maximus rubbing two pieces of wood together. In Arabia and other eastern countries, the trees furnishing the wood for fire production are known as mark and afar, and a passage in the Quran referring to this practice reads, "For he is skilled in every kind of creation, who giveth you fire out of the green, and behold ye kindle your fuel from thence." In Hindu mythology, Agni is the god of fire, and in some of the old Vedic hymns he is mentioned as dwelling in two pieces of wood, which, when rubbed together, produce fire. Dr. J. Muir, in a poem, refers to the birth of Agni thus: "Sprung from the mystic pair by priestly hands, in wedlock joined, forth flashes Agni bright. But O ye heavens and earth, I tell you right, the unnatural child devours the parent brands." The Mahabharata, speaking of Agni, as desirous of recruiting his vigor by consuming the whole Khandava forest, but being prevented from doing so by Indra. In the end, however, with the aid of Krishna and Arjuna, he accomplished his object. Dr. Muir, in the above-mentioned poem, speaks of the destruction of forests by fire, and addressing Agni says, "Thou levelest all thou touchest, forests vast. Thou shearest like beards which barber's razor shaves. Thy wind-driven flames roar loud as ocean waves, and all thy track is black when thou hast passed." In the original Sanskrit text, Dr. Muir has collected numerous expressions and sentences alluding to the ancient fire worship or worship of Agni in Aryan India. One of these says, "Fed by wood with blazing tawny mane, he sends up his smoke like a pillar to the sky or like a wavering banner." Another most expressive sentence descriptive of a forest fire reads, "When he has yoked his wind-driven coursers to his car, the beautiful, fleet, ruddy steeds that can assume all shapes, he bellows like a bull and invades the forest. The birds are terrified at the noise when his grass-devouring sparks fly around, and his wheels mark his path with blackness." Among the Hindus, the kindling of the sacred fire on the altar was a most holy ceremony, two peculiarly shaped pieces of wood being used. One of these was from the Ficus religiosa, itself a sacred tree, and the other was of some softer wood, usually the samai, Acacia summa, with a hollow in it. The process consisted in rapidly twirling the former in the hollow of the latter, symbolizing generation, which by the friction a spark appeared, and thus Agni was born. An ancient Chinese philosopher was once credited with having invented the fire drill by seeing a bird peck at the branches of a tree until sparks came. In the Caroline Islands, there is a legend that Olaf Fate, the god of fire, instructed the bird Moai, spelled M-W-I, to carry fire in his bill down to earth. The bird did so, storing fire in each tree, so that when required it could be brought forth by friction. The Hervey Islanders have a legend telling how Maui obtained the secret of making fire from Mauiki, the fire god. Maui went to the underworld and picked a quarrel with Mauiki, whom he worsted, but promised to spare him on condition that he parted to him the secret of fire, where it was hidden and how it was produced. Mauiki accordingly did so by the aid of his fire sticks, but Maui, having now obtained the grand secret in revenge for the trouble he had had, set fire to Mauiki's abode. The legend tells how the rocks split and cracked with the heat, and how the flames burst through the earth at Teoa and were with difficulty extinguished. This spot for long was waste ground and was held sacred until, after the advent of Christianity, it was cultivated. Maui, now owning the secret, kept it to himself for a long time, but in the end he compassionately let the inhabitants of the world share it with him. In the island of Peru, one of the Gilbert group, the natives say that an old lady obtained fire from heaven and put it in a tree, and then told them they could bring it out by friction. And I do believe that this is where I'm going to stop for now. No. There are only a few pages left of this chapter. I am going to continue. Divination, divining rod, wands, etc. The foretelling of future events or discovery of something concealed by means of a rod or wand, or sometimes from the fruit of a tree, has been for long practiced among many races, and even yet experts in this art claim to be able to discover the whereabouts of water or the presence of precious metals by means of the divining rod. In all mythologies, wands or rods have obviously a magic power and were used to drive away the powers of darkness, serpents, and other evils, as well as to discover hidden treasures. In fairy tales, we find the wand mentioned, and the fairy queen is invariably shown bearing her wand and with it performing her marvels. The divining rod proper was used to discover the whereabouts of treasures or the presence of water. In olden times, it was essential that these rods should be handled by sorcerers or by persons with a knowledge of the magic formula. Different trees have been called upon to furnish this rod. One of these was the willow, it being believed to be full of magical properties. In Sicily, branches of the pomegranate tree were considered the best, while in Sweden the mistletoe was sometimes used. The most efficacious of all these wands, however, was that supplied by the hazel, and it was also called the wishing rod. M. Charul describes the method of using the divining rod thus. Since the 11th century, we find mentioned the use of the divining wand for discovering springs and treasures. It is a forked branch of hazel, alder, beech, or apple. This is how it should be held. One of the forks of the hand is held, not too firmly, but the palm of the hand turned up. By holding the other fork of the branch in the other hand, the main stem will be parallel to the horizon. The holder advances gently towards the place where water is suspected to be. When he arrives there, if water is below, the rod turns in the hand and bends toward the earth like a needle which has been magnetized. Such is the account of those who believe in the virtue of the divining rod. They add that it has also the property of discovering mines, hidden treasures, thieves, and fugitive murderers. The divining rod seems to have had some connection with the elves or pixies, who have all the treasures of the earth in their keeping. In Cornwall, it is said that the pixies guide the rod to the mine, and that a rich lode has often been discovered by hearing the singing of the elves on the moors at night. In very ancient times, when the races of the earth were pastoral peoples or shepherds, the patriarch bore his shepherd's crook, and in time, as he assumed greater authority over his tribe, this crook or wand developed into the insignia of royalty known as the scepter. The chiefs of many savage races still bear a wand as a symbol of their rank. The rod was also the emblem of discipline, and many ancient sculptures, particularly in Egypt and Assyria, show the ruler wielding the rod over his subjects and captives. In some parts of the East Indies, it is said that a single branch of a tree placed over the door of a house by the police prevents anyone from leaving the house until the branch is removed, and a single branch placed in the middle of a public march is sufficient for all those who find themselves within the march to consider themselves as prisoners of the king. The rods of Moses and of Aaron were considered to have been the origin of the crosier or pastoral staff of bishops. Adam is said to have once cut a staff from a tree which grew in the Garden of Eden, and this staff descended to Noah. It became in turn the property of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The latter, when in Egypt, gave it to Joseph, and in due time Moses obtained possession of it. According to the book of Numbers, XVII 8, the rod of Aaron appeared to have been made from the almond tree. There we are told that Moses put 12 rods representing the 12 tribes of Israel into the tabernacle, to choose from among them which tribe was to furnish the high priest. Next day, the rod representing the tribe of Levi was found to be covered with leaves and blossoms, and accordingly that tribe was set apart for the priesthood. This rod was from the almond tree. The above is one of the many instances of which we read respecting wands and staffs which have miraculously borne leaves and flowers. Mr. S. Baring Gould, relating the legend of Tannhauser, says that after Tannhauser had escaped from the Venusberg, he confessed his guilt to Pope Urban IV, desiring absolution. The Pope, horrified at the enormity of the sin, spurned the penitent, saying, "Guilt as thine can never, never be remitted. Sooner shall this staff in my hand grow green and blossom than that God should pardon thee." On hearing this, Fiat Tannhauser sadly retraced his steps to the Venusberg, and as the only refuge open to him. He had been gone for 3 days when Urban suddenly discovered his staff to have budded and flowered. Messengers were at once sent after Tannhauser, but they could only ascertain that a weary and haggard man had been seen to enter the Horsalach, and since then Tannhauser has been heard of no more. A somewhat similar tale is told in Sweden of a water spirit known as the Neck, who appeared either as a young or an old man. A Swedish tradition tells that a priest once saw the Neck as a young man playing on the harp. He said to him, "Why dost thou so joyously strike thy harp? Sooner shall this dried cane that I hold in my hand grow green and flower than that thou shalt obtain salvation." The young man was very sorrowful and wept bitterly. The priest continued on his journey, but had not ridden far when his staff began to put forth leaves and lovely flowers. Hastily returning to the Neck, he showed him the flowering staff and said, "Behold, now my old staff is grown green and flowery like a young branch in a rose garden. So likewise may hope bloom in the hearts of all created beings, for their Redeemer liveth." The Neck was thus comforted and gaily resumed his harping. Classical mythology tells how Prometheus brought fire down from heaven enclosed in a hollow wand. Dionysus, or Bacchus, the god of wine, is always represented as bearing a particular wand known as a thyrsus or caduceus. Mercury is also represented as carrying one, and in the Homeric hymn it appears as having 3 leaves, hence its appellation as tripethalou. This caduceus had 2 snakes twining round it, but originally these were olive boughs. With this wand, the god touched the dwellers on the earth, teaching them how to speak and endowing them with all good qualities. St. Patrick drove out the serpents from Ireland by means of his sacred rod, and in Sicily a branch from the elder tree is considered to be far superior to any other rod for killing serpents and driving them away thieves. In Scandinavia, the belief was held that no child could be born in safety and no soul could depart in peace if a willow wand was suspended anywhere nearby. The sallow, Salix caprea, was the willow in question, and it seems to have been very full of magical properties. In these countries, also, the wand or rod of Woden, Wotan's wand, was used for measuring land, and in some other countries a rod was used to give sasine of properties. In addition to a sod of earth and stone, a branch of tree was thrust into the sod, and the whole was presented to the new proprietor. There is a very ancient tradition which tells that after Adam had been banished from paradise, God gave him the power to create any animal he desired by striking the sea with a hazel rod. The first animal he produced was a sheep, and Eve, jealous of his power, thought to go one better. Her stroke unfortunately produced a wolf, which at once devoured the sheep. Adam, to redress matters, then created the dog, which instantly attacked and overcame the wolf. Long ago in Europe, omens were taken from the manner in which rods, when thrown up, fell backwards or forwards to the left, backwards or forwards to the right or to the left. The hazelnut, like the tree itself, was formerly believed to possess divining powers, and even still the magic power of the nut is held to be all potent on All Hallows Eve or Halloween, also in England called Nutcrack Night. This was the night on which the fate of lovers was determined by the behavior of hazelnuts when placed on the fire. The poet Gray wrote, "2 hazelnuts I threw into the flame, and to each nut I gave a sweetheart's name. This with the loudest bounced me sore amazed, that with a flame of brightest color blazed. As blazed the nut, so may thy passion grow, for 'twas thy nut that did so brightly glow." Burns likewise celebrated the rites of Halloween in Scotland. "Some merry friendly country folks together did convene to burn their nets and poo their stocks, and had their Halloween fu blithe that night." Sometimes each unmarried person had a nut named after them, and the manner in which it burned was believed to prognosticate certain events in the afterlife of the person whose name it bore. In the South Sea Islands generally, and particularly in Polynesia, the coconut was much used for divining purposes. Probably the reason lay in its alleged origin, it being said to have originated from the head of a man, the marks on it giving it a remote resemblance to a human face. This next part is called the man in the moon. From the earliest ages, the markings or spots observed on the surface of the moon had been a subject of much speculation, until the telescope revealed their true nature. When the moon is full, a resemblance is alleged to be traceable to the features of the human face, or to the figure of a man bending, bearing a burden on his back. From this various legends arose, making the moon the habitation of a man, almost all of which account for his appearance there as being a penance imposed on him for certain crimes committed while he was on earth. Different countries have their own characteristic legends. In Central Europe, the legend describes the banishment to different crimes. In Westphalia, it takes different forms. Some affirm that Cain was taken to the moon while carrying a bunch of briars, which he intended offering to the Lord, that being the cheapest produce of his fields, or that the man represents Isaac bearing the wood for his own sacrifice. Another tells that a man who was working in his fields on Good Friday had just lifted a bunch of thorns on his fork when he was suddenly transported to the moon, where he still remains in company with a woman who was also banished there for churning butter on a Sunday. Yet another legend says that the man was banished to the moon for decorating the church with thorns on a Sunday. The Swabian legend tells how a man, accused of pruning his vines on a Sunday, exclaimed, "If I am guilty, may I be exiled to the moon." Having in fact committed the crime, he was duly transported thither, carrying his bundle of prunings. The Black Forest tale runs that a man stole a bunch of wood from the forest on a Sunday, knowing that all the foresters would be absent on that day. Soon after he had left the forest, he was accosted by God himself, who reproved him for his sacrilege and gave him his choice to be banished either to the sun or to the moon. Objecting to being burned in the sun, he said he would rather freeze it in the moon, and there he remains, still bearing his stolen bundle in his hand and his axe over his shoulder. In ancient Chinese tradition says that a man who had committed various sins when he was an anchoret was banished to the moon and condemned to eternally drive his axe into a cassia tree, known as the giant tree Kuei, but that the gashes he makes always close up directly. The cassia is thus known in China as the moon tree. When Captain Ross first visited the Esquimaux of Baffin's Bay, They imagined him and his crew to be phantoms from the sky. They believed, as they were told by their wizards, that the dead inhabited the moon, where wood was very abundant, and when they saw the vessel with its boats, masts, oars, etc., they were filled with amazement and whispered with mystery to each other, "How much wood there is in the moon, how very much." I said Baffin's Bay, but I would pronounce it Baffin's Bay. This next part is the Yule log. In ancient times, a huge log of wood used to be laid across the fire, with many ceremonies on Christmas Eve. This appears to have been a survival of the still more ancient custom of lighting fires at the winter solstice to celebrate the commencement of the return journey of the sun. Brand, in his Popular Antiquities, Volume 1, page 467, gives a great deal of information regarding this Yule log, or Yule clog, as he calls it. M. Fertialt, in his Coupe d'Eau sur la Noëls en Bourgogne, describing Christmas in Burgundy, speaks of the Yule log, which is there called souch, thus: "This is a huge log which is placed on the fire on Christmas Eve, and which is called in Burgundy on this account La Souche de Noël." Then the father of the family, particularly among the middle classes, sings solemnly Christmas carols with his wife and children, and the smallest of whom he sends into the corner to pray that the Yule log may bear him some sugar plums. Meanwhile, little parcels of them are placed under each end of the log, and the children come and pick them up, believing in good faith that the great log has borne them. And that is the end of chapter 7. So we will be starting chapter 8 next, which is called Legendary. That is on page 270, Forest and Tree Legends. All right. Lots of love, and next video soon.